at the English Bill of the Glorious Revolution and the Bill of Rights. This fancy-looking guy is James II. And it's like the other kings leading up to this point. He's got multiple titles depending on who he's king over. At the same time, he is King James II and King James VII, King of England and King of Ireland.
Wait, this is after Charles.
After Charles II. Yep. He's also King of Scotland. He is the last Roman Catholic monarch in English history. That right there should tell you something. His theological background should tell you something how it's going to play out with Parliament, shouldn't it? Why? What do we know about Parliament by and large at this point?
Oh, they're Protestants.
Yes, thank you. Protestants. Very suspicious of anybody who is Catholic because of where their loyalties lie.
And the Pope.
In the Pope, yep. And keep in mind, this is still during a time period where if you were of the opposite religion of your king, you could easily be executed for it. Lots of Protestants in Europe are being murdered because they're not Catholic, and likewise, to a large degree, not to the same degree that the Protestants were persecuted, but the Catholics were as well. But by far, many more Protestants were killed by the Catholic armies than the Protestants. It's also this time period where in Europe, the Treaty of Westphalia was signed. It officially ended the 30 Years' War, which is the war that the Martin Luther actually sparked with the Reformation. For 30 years, the Catholic armies from the different Catholic kings tried to squash out the Protestant movement, and some odd million or maybe 2 million Europeans were killed in this war. And the Treaty of Westphalia, which is still used today in many of its aspects. In fact, the origins of the United Nations come out of this. One of the provisions it provided for is whatever the religion of the king is at the time is the religion of the country. However, it's for the first time they acknowledge religious rights. You could practice your religion privately in your home if your belief system was different than the king's. Now that, again, like most everything else that we're going to see here, on paper that sounds good, but it was not practiced very well. And most certainly for our purposes, it was not practiced in England. You're going to see that at this time period as the Puritans, the Calvinists, starts getting persecuted and killed. That's how they end up coming here, and we'll see that probably this week in a documentary. If not, it'll be early next week. Okay, you don't need to remember this detail. Just understand it's King James II. That's going to be the main figure in the Glorious Revolution. So I do need to talk about the Glorious Revolution a little bit. Because of his aggressiveness as being a Catholic and trying to reestablish a Catholic theological system over the Church of England. And I'm being very simplistic here. Please, most of what I'm talking to you about is very simplistic only because I can't spend a whole quarter just teaching British history. So it's, as anything in the human condition, when you study human beings, it's never cut and dry. It's very complicated, but I'm trying to just narrow it down to give you just the not even the Reader's Digest version. But needless to say, Parliament had a conversation with the king and told him, unless you want to lose your head, here's what we want. He valued the connection between his head and his shoulders a little bit more than he did his rule. So he agreed to what's now called the English Bill of Rights. And the reason it's called the Glorious Revolution is because a new form of government, particularly how the government system, the monarch, addressed the people, totally changed. And it's glorious because no one died over it. They did not have to go to war to force it. So if somebody ever asks you, why is it called the Glorious Revolution? It's because they were able to have a governmental change without bloodshed. They didn't have to go to war. And again, I'm being very simplistic here for the purpose of this class. You could spend a lifetime studying this part of English history. And there are people that they dedicate their entire life to this time period. So the English Bill of Rights, monarch would rule by consent of Parliament. Instead of having complete divine right, anything that the king wanted to have done would be done through consent of Parliament. He couldn't do anything, even still today. In fact, the king today, King and Queen of England, is so, I don't want to say watered down, that may be even too simplistic, but they are essentially just figureheads. Parliament makes all the decisions. Now, the king and queen, right now we only have a queen, but England only has a queen right now. But when they do get a king again, when she dies and Prince Philip becomes the king, what he wants has a lot of sway, but Parliament has no obligation to go with it. But at this time period, the Parliament has to agree with the king before an action would take place. So the provisions, you will want to write this down, the provisions of the English Bill of Rights asserts the nation's ancient rights and liberties. They are refining the language. These things existed in one way or another, but now they're consolidating language so it's very clear and precise. No taxation without consent of Parliament, period. If they have to reassert this provision when it was first written in 1215, what's that tell you about what's going on in history?
That they're taxing with still without.
That's right. The king still has this lust to dominate through taxation, which he always will. Every government official does. Once they realize there's unlimited spending, all they got to do is raise your taxes more. The right to petition the king for grievances. Let's say Parliament. You feel like Parliament has violated your rights. You have a right to address the king for his opinion on it. No quartering of troops during peacetime. We already know what's going on there, right? Sending troops into the homes to keep an eye on you at your expense. Looky here. That ideal is not an American ideal. The right to bear arms. Why would they need this in 1668? Why would they need a provision guaranteeing the right of the citizens to have a firearm in their home?
Because they're getting invaded.
Invaded by who?
The French.
Nope.
Oh wait, others.
Who's the others? This is a critical part for you to understand over this provision in our own law, too. Whose tyranny? The king. Not the deer. They're not worried about deer and elk uprising. It is the government that they are needing protection from. And what was happening is starting with King Charles I. Yes, we had firearms all the way back then. They were called matchlock rifles, muskets. The king would go in and confiscate the firearms away from the Protestants. So the Protestants could not defend themselves against the king's army, who was Catholic, who was trying to squash the Protestants. and to enforce his taxation rules, though they were illegal. And a whole bunch of other things. The point here is they wanted to assure they had the capability to defend themselves equally against a tyrannical government. Freedom of speech. That's always an issue for governments, especially when you speak against them. When you expose their corruption, when you expose their illegal activities. It's also a problem, and we see that today, when somebody has something to say that you don't like. This provision is not to protect speech that we like. Speech that you like doesn't need protection. It is the speech you don't like. Such as somebody who's got racist remarks. Facebook is a prime example right now. You want to get banned on Facebook, post too many conservative statements. And I'm not trying to play politics here, but that's what's really happening. And there's many conservative individuals, including senators, have been banned, and now what they're calling shadow banning, which I don't quite understand how that works.
It's where they ban you, but you can still post, but other people can't see.
But other people can't see. Yeah, that was my understanding. Because they're deeming, usually it's their computer system. It's not a live person who's making the decision. They have algorithms that if they're looking for key words, that if they see that you're saying them, then it does happen more and more even now. I mean, Congress had to get involved here, was it last spring, called Zuckerberg in and drilled them about what's going on at Facebook. Why are you censoring people? Now, and then we could get into the issue is it a public company, private company?
Well,
do they have a right to make decisions? Yeah.
It's also a public forum, so it can be argued that it's a public place of free speech.
That's right. That's the argument. Those who don't like the banning, that's the argument they make. Those who don't mind the conservative, because it's mostly conservatives that's getting banned. And then of course the white supremacists who, and quite frankly, I don't like what they got to say either. But here's the thing to remember, ladies and gentlemen. History has taught us this very clearly. When banning or book banning or those kind of things start, there is no stop to it. That's the issue with this going on right now. It's the speech that we don't like is what needs protected. Because as soon as that is erased, as soon as that is banned, then there's no stopping the talk that you used to think is good or is okay. Good speech, well, speech we like, I should say, does not need protected. It is the speech we don't like. Excessive bail. We have a problem with this today. Excessive bail. The judges then, as well as today, will put a bail on you so you can't get out of jail. That was never the intent of this provision. Yes?
Well, but some people will pay bail and then just skip.
Yes, that is why there is a bail, is to help guarantee you will come back for court. The reason bail is important is that it's really hard to defend yourself and keep a roof over your head while you're sitting in jail. You go to jail and can't get out, you're going to lose your job. If you got family at home waiting, they're going to go bankrupt. They're going to have to get a job. It's a life-destructing thing. So the idea of the bail, it was an insurance policy. It will be enough money, enough collateral is what it is, that you don't want to lose it by skipping out. But it was low enough where you could pay it and get out and defend yourself and keep your livelihood going. Nowadays, it's not uncommon to have $100,000, $500,000 bail on what seems to be not, especially for somebody who doesn't have the means to pay for it. If you don't have a house with collateral in the house, you can't even put your house up for a bail bondsman. So I see this a lot, and I'm like, that's a violation of our rights. But nobody's willing to do anything about it. I guess I'm not either, but just don't get in trouble. Don't break the law. But I see that a lot, a lot of people get nailed with this, with excessive bail. That's why you see in the news, The defense attorney asked for a reduced amount of bail. That's because the guy has no way of paying it, no way of getting collateral to make bail. And like I said, if you're in jail, you're going to very likely lose your home, your I don't know what people do. I just know that if you're not working and nowadays, if you're not set up to live on a one-income family, it takes two of you to run to pay for things, you're in a world of hurt. And then you're going to be stuck with not paying your attorney. You have to get public defender, which is subpar at best.
And they try to get you to say guilty.
Yes, that's why you see a lot of pleas, because it's cheaper to take a 5-year jail sentence than to spend millions of dollars trying to defend yourself. So you may end up the jury may find yourself innocent, but at what cost? If you're found innocent, you can't go to the government and ask for your money back. It's gone. There's no, hey, you prosecuted me wrongfully. You lose it all. So, cruel and unusual punishment. That's a big one. Still once in a while in discussion today, particularly with our terrorist groups. When we used to capture them, we used to what's called waterboarding. Some people call that cruel and unusual. Others don't. Some of the things they used to do, if you ever watched the History Channel, they had a couple programs on this. But they would put you in what's called a brass bull. It was basically a bronze casting of a bull. It was hollowed out inside, where they'd stuff you in, lock the bottom, and put a fire up underneath it. And as you cooked and screamed, then supposedly it sounded like a bull roaring as the noises were coming out of the bull's nose as you were cooked. A couple of other devices, they would put you in like a wheel with long spikes sticking through it. And as it turned, you're rolling around like you're in a dryer. And as you can imagine, you're being stuck like a pincushion until you die. So we even had such devices as trying to figure out whether you're a witch or not, Salem witch trial. Tie you to like a big bucket kind of thing on a big pole and dump you into the river and hold you down there for a while and pick you back up. And if you didn't drown, you're a witch. If you drowned, that was your innocence. So we had our own fair share, and we still debate that today over capital punishment. It's lethal injection, cruel and unusual. A lot of people said hanging was, so we quit doing that in Idaho in 1954, I think was our last hanging. Then it took 18 minutes for the guy to die. They didn't do it right. So we quit hanging, and I think we did firing squad for a while, and then in the 70s, it was ruled unconstitutional. In 76, it was brought back as constitutional. I think we may even legalize the gas chamber for a while, but now it's lethal injection in Idaho. Other states have different ways. You got electric chair. Electric chair is not always foolproof. That doesn't always work the first time. Most of the time it does, but it doesn't always. Have you ever seen the movie Green Mile? Yeah. That has happened before, where you catch fire. What's that? Yes. According to that movie, yes. But I have read accounts where people have literally just swelled up into one big blister and different stuff. I mean, it's pretty, if done right, you don't even know it's happening to you. You're immediately unconscious. But those who don't get it done right, it's pretty horrific. So we still deal with this today. Is solitary confinement cruel and unusual? Some people would argue yes. Here's a big one, the right to trial by jury of your peers. Not a jury of the king's men, but of the common people. Now, keep in mind, let's say if you're a peasant farmer and you commit a crime. A peasant farmer isn't going to sit on the trial. They still have a very high class system here. But the point is, it wasn't government officials loyal to the king who was being appointed. It's going to be people of, the idea is of equal status to you.
And even today, aren't most jurors like made of like good, higher standing citizens? They aren't just common field worker, criminals.
If you were a voter, you can be called for jury duty. So a field worker who's a registered voter, you're on the list for jury pool. So it's much more fairer now. What I find to be what makes the disadvantage of our system or this system is not all jurors are educated enough to sit on a jury and judge somebody. There's been some horrific decisions because they were just ignorant of the facts. So, but it is the best system that exists right now, and probably will be the only system. I would rather have somebody equal to my status than have a judge, and solely a judge, make a decision. In most cases, there may be some that I would, I think I'd rather use the judge on this one. But the nice thing about it, you get to choose as the defendant, whether you want a jury by trial or jury by judge. Particularly when it comes to a life. There's a category of infraction that triggers that. So, and of course, the right to due process. If you're arrested, you have a right to know what it is that you're being arrested for, what you're accused of, and a right to see the evidence. If you followed any of the Bundy issues, the ranchers in Nevada and Oregon, when they went to trial, that's one of the reasons why the judge threw the case out after the third or fourth trial, because each time they found out the government was withholding evidence that ended up being favorable to the defense. That's never going to be a good thing. In fact, they will probably win a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the government because of that. And after it's either the third trial or the fourth trial, the judge was so disgusted, and she was no fan of the Bundys at all, but she was so disgusted with the prosecutors, she not only threw it out of court, but threw it out with what's called with prejudice. It means that they can never be tried for it again. So that was the judge's way of punishing the prosecutors for their misconduct and violating due process.
Advisory. It's just time management and scheduling. It should take maximum 2 periods.
Okay.
If you're already doing something with no time frame on it.
Well, this would be good because it gives me something when I run out.
And this here in the back, I'm bringing you copies, one for one of your advisory kids, so you don't have to waste any of your copies.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. Everybody's got these provisions written down? Where have we seen these before? Our Bill of Rights. Exactly where we got those from. Because remember, our founding fathers were British. They weren't creating something new either. They're taking their heritage that they understood, that they had as natural-born Englishmen. We haven't even talked about natural law. We will when we get to the Declaration, though. I'll tie all this together to show you that these are not rights by men or given to men by men. Or another way to say it, these are not rights that came from the government. And that's very critical for you to understand. Because if government gives you these rights, what can they also do? Government being your lawmakers.
Take them away.
Take them away anytime they want.
That's why when I hear about gun control, I'm like, you realize criminals aren't going to follow those laws.
Exactly. And so all you do, and this is the argument for leaving that's anti-gun control measures, is you leave the good people without any other means of protecting themselves, which goes back to right here. Why did our founding fathers, these ancient leaders, want the provision for firearm ownership? So they could protect themselves. Again, it was not about hunting, and they weren't worried about the deer uprising.